right, welcome on in to the Between the Hashmarks podcast. As always, I'm Matt Lombardo, joined by my good friend and mentor and the purveyor of Mike Tanier's Too Deep Zone, Mike Tanier. Mike, how's everything going, my man?
We are 1 week closer to actual football. My brain has not melted out of my ears from watching preseason games. It's going great, in other words. It's going fantastic.
It sure is. And, this was one of those weeks where you saw a lot of teams play a lot of their starters, but you also saw some teams go up against teams that played their backups. So what's real? What's a mirage? What can
Right.
we dive into? What do we look at and say that's not how it's going to play out? But the one constant that really jumped out this weekend, and we're going to talk to Richmond Webb a little bit later on in the podcast, of Miami Dolphins legend, about the Dolphins, about first-round pick Chop Robinson, and a whole lot more. But the one consistent thing from week one of the preseason to week two, Mike, I'm absolutely blown away by Caleb Williams. And I wrote last week in Four Downs that if a space alien had beamed into Orchard Park and just watched that he'd look like a 10-time All-Pro. I look at what happened on this weekend in this game, and it's like I'm watching, and I don't want to put this hex on the kid. It looks like I'm watching Patrick Mahomes.
I'm convinced I've been watching a totally different series of games. That when they put, it's a deep fake. When I put on the Bears, I'm watching a different series of games. Now, don't get me wrong. I saw the passes. You mentioned earlier about the backups and the mirage element of things. And I'm blown away by Caleb Williams' upside from what I've seen. And also, I feel that he is further along than Justin Fields has been at any time, including this weekend.
For sure.
But I also watched 4 drives where he couldn't do anything, where he was throwing balls over guys' heads, where he was taking sacks. And I'm not seeing a lot of plays right now that except for the out of structure miracle plays, which are happening against backups and not just backups, but third stringers. Let's be blunt a lot of times. So I'm the pump the brakes guy right now. I hate always being the pump the brakes guy, but you just said Patrick Mahomes.
That's
You
the
just
beauty of this
said Patrick
podcast.
Mahomes.
It's the optimism and the rain on the parade, and it's the youthful exuberance and the experience of the veteran sports writer. It's the yin and the yang that we have going here.
So I got to be the guy who pees on the cupcake and calls it frosting. That's my job. That's my job.
And at this moment, yes, because I look at Caleb Williams, how much different does that outing look if the touchdown pass to Rome Odunze counts? How much do you overlook some of those things, some of the plays that maybe didn't work out on some of the drives late in the game, if the highlight reel level throw and play winds up counting because Odunze had the awareness to stay in bounds rather than catch the ball a foot outside the marker?
Then you don't get the scramble touchdown, which really illustrated who was out there on the field for the Bengals. It was like you, me, my dog. I mean, these guys are just like they can't run. They're discombobulated when he comes off a structure. And if the flip side of this is what happens if there's 3 Bengals starters out there? Is that Odunze play a sack? Is it just a broken up pass, et cetera? So now the one thing you do in the preseason, and this is the veteran sports writer, is you do look at the peak things. You don't focus, especially on a rookie. Oh, he can't do this. Oh, he can't do that. Therefore, he's garbage. He's a rookie. He's learning these things as you go. You look at what he can do. And that's the good thing about Williams is lots and lots and lots of can do. It's just that I do get the impression that people saw two gifts and then missed the first 3 series of the game where he's overthrowing routine passes and making those rookie mistakes that we will see in September and October and November.
And I think part of that might be playing your first game at home. Maybe you're a little bit, amped up about that and still working on the timing with your receivers like DJ Moore and Keenan Allen and these guys. And Dunze, of course, a fellow rookie, fellow top 10 pick. But I look at the upside for that offense and I look at the upside for Caleb Williams. And, this is where going to tell me to pump the brakes again.
Yeah.
I look at the NFC North now as a legitimate 3-team race. And I think that the Lions are the clear-cut favorite, Super Bowl contender for a reason. They're in that conversation. But I think that the Bears and Packers games are going to be very interesting because unlike a year ago, the Bears have a competent and prolific potential offense to go up against Jordan Love and what the Packers have out there right now.
I think they're going to be a competitive team, but I think you're taking 2025's darling and you're trying to fast forward them to 2024. And we're not there yet. I don't think they're there yet defensively. And again, we saw like an entire half of starters against backups and starters against third stringers because the Bear starters were out there for the most part on defense. No one's seen Montez Sweat in in months. He might be with Haason Reddick in Japan for all we know. But like the enthusiasm right now, you have to watch it because it feels a little bit like Steelers enthusiasm from last year, where it's like, look how good this looks, look how good this looks. And it's like, yeah, let's see it against starters. Let's see it longitudinally across multiple games. And then maybe I'll start getting excited and putting them in the same pedestal as the Packers.
That's the beauty of the preseason, because you're going to get a little bit of both, and you have to parse through and see what you see, try to figure out what's real, what's a mirage, and we're going to find out in a couple of weeks here where these guys are at for real when the games start counting and it's starters on starters and all of those things. But we do know that at least two, including Caleb Williams, at least two of the rookie quarterbacks are guaranteed to be starters this year, because just before we started recording this podcast on the 19th, Dan Quinn and the Commanders named Jayden Daniels the starting quarterback, like there was any drama, like there was any chance that he wasn't going to be the starting quarterback week one.
They invited Marcus Mariota to come in to talk about it. He tripped 3 times in the corridor on his way in, then got hurt, then quit the team. Just kidding. We love you, Marcus. But I did not know. I wrote a thing in the 2 Deep Zone saying, oh, we're calling the races. I didn't think the Commanders were a race.
Right.
Was Marcus Mariota supposed to have been competing?
No, I think he was always one of those, training camp arm, preseason bodies to get, rookie quarterback X, in this case, Jayden Daniels, up to speed with the offense, be the coach on the field. But I guess there is a little bit of, I don't want to say drama, but maybe a little bit of surprise that it happened now, because you know how head coaches are. Oh, the depth chart is written in sand until the day before the season opener, and the starters are the starters that you'll see when they run out on the field and out of the tunnel in week one. But the fact that Daniels was just so leaps and bounds ahead, I guess you can't hide it, and you put him out there and you build his confidence from here.
Right, and I think that's the good way to go. By the way, I've been seeing some malicious Cliff Kingsbury slander for the offensive coordinator going across the socials right now. Apparently, Terry McLaurin is lining up, I believe, on the right side of the formation every single snap. Now, that could just be preseason, but if you remember, DeAndre Hopkins lined up on the same side of the formation every single snap. Yeah. And now people will say, Marvin Harrison Sr. lined up on every single side. This isn't Peyton Manning we're talking about here, folks. Right. This is a team that's supposed to be doing multiple, be multiple and be unpredictable on offense, not let Manning just call the play at the line. And that's a little bit of a worry for Jayden Daniels moving forward. When you talk about the traditional rookie quarterback and the custodian and saying all these things, that's Sean Payton and the Broncos, though.
Oh, for sure.
Right. And we're switching a little of that. We don't know right now. We have no idea if Bo Nix is going to be the starter. Do you have any idea?
You and I watched that game on Sunday night. We saw what we saw. We saw last week. If Sean Payton, I believe that you had the diatribe last week that Sean Payton is a troll and he loves to troll the national media and set the narrative and challenge the conversation in August during the preseason and keep the curtain down about his quarterbacks. I don't know how you watch what we saw last night against the Packers. Some backups, some starters, mostly backups.
Right.
Over 100 yards, a couple of really nice drives. And I thought, once again, Bo Nix checked the box of having cool and calm under pressure, poise in the pocket, good decision-making. Yep. I don't know how you watch that tape and you don't pull a Dan Quinn and name him the starting quarterback today over Jarrett Stidham and Zach Wilson.
If you're Sean Payton and you're just doing it when you feel like doing it because you like making the media and the fans wait and doing it that way. By the way, you and I were both kind of doing the same thing on the socials, and we're watching the game, and Nix throws what looks like the touchdown pass, and we're both like, well, that's it. He's the starting quarterback. And then he had stepped over the line, and we're both like, well, okay, maybe he's not yet the starting quarterback, but really he's the starting quarterback. And then he throws the other touchdown pass. Okay, now it's officially unofficial.
Yeah, for sure. When he crossed the line of scrimmage, I think my line was, well, I guess we're going to have to wait 3 more weeks for Sean Payton to announce this because he stepped 3 feet over the line.
Right.
And again, that stuff happens. And it happens in the preseason. It could happen to anybody. It happens to rookie quarterbacks. But I think overall, you look at what Javonte Williams did in that game. You look at what Bo Nix has been able to do the last 2 weeks. And you're starting to see the seeds being sown of progress in Denver. And again, I think the gap between where Denver is and where Kansas City is, it might as well be one of the Rocky Mountains. But I do think that when you look at the AFC West, they're the closest thing right now, in my opinion, to a quote unquote threat to the Kansas City Chiefs.
Yeah, I mean, but yeah, they're at Manitou Springs and they're looking up at Pikes Peak when you
Yes.
talk about the situation there. And and again, I don't like projecting too far with rookie quarterbacks, but when I see Bo Nix, veteran offensive line, Sean Payton with a short passing game and good running backs, decent receivers, good opportunity to grow. But I see Caleb Williams with all those receivers, and I kind of like Shane Waldron. I think he's a good, good at making a quarterback friendly system. He's making these plays. Great opportunity there. Jaden Daniels got a couple of receivers, and he's got Cliff. Okay. There are some things in place for Daniels that I'm optimistic about, and some things I'm pessimistic about.
Yeah, the supporting cast in Washington, as far as the skill players, with Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, Austin Eckler, maybe Zach Ertz does something. That's where you get excited about the Commanders in that division, and with Daniels doing what he did in LSU, translating a bit to Washington. That's where you get a little bit excited there. But I've never been a believer in Cliff Kingsbury at the NFL level. I don't know that the track record suggests that anybody should be a believer in Cliff Kingsbury at the NFL level. And that might be what puts the ceiling over Jaden Daniels' rookie season in the Commanders in 2024.
Caleb Williams in his 2022 season at USC. Caleb Williams right now on the Bears. Caleb Williams, the 1 year that Cliff Kingsbury is coaching him. It's like that. This is where we learn that he can do things when the play breaks down. So
Yep.
blessed are the coaches who don't rely on their quarterback to do things when their play breaks down.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that's what you need when you're fielding an offensive line that's still a work in progress, and you're still trying to get your feet underneath you as a rookie quarterback.
Yeah, especially in Washington. I think they have a lot of questions on their offensive line right now.
Absolutely. So, you look across the one really heartbreaking development over the weekend when it comes to rookie quarterbacks is JJ McCarthy with the torn meniscus out for the season. And you look at the training camp that they've had, and it's just been tragedy followed by disaster, followed by disappointment in Minnesota. And I just look at that offense, and you hear that Jordan Addison's going to be okay after getting carted off with the knee injury, they hope, potentially by week 1. You still have Justin Jefferson. You still have a pretty good offensive line. But if Sam Darnold's the quarterback, I just have a hard time believing in the Minnesota Vikings. And I'm just hopeful that JJ McCarthy will be healthy enough in 2025 to live up to some of the promise that he had coming out of this pre-draft process for the Vikings' sake.
Yeah, and I hope for the best for JJ McCarthy. But you talk about the offensive side. They just had Stephon Gilmore at cornerback, and you wrote this week about, especially in the secondary, how promising the defense is now looking there in Minnesota.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things where you look at a guy like Lewis Cine, who's a former first-round pick.
Yeah.
He has a heck of a game. I mean, there wasn't a play that he was on the field for that he wasn't involved in. 11 total tackles, had the sack, had a pass breakup, and then he just absolutely destroyed Huntley about a yard shy of the marker, and his helmet popped off, 4 yards back that way.
Right.
And I just think that the pieces might be there. If you bring in a veteran like Gilmore, if Cine can, steal that starting job next to Harrison at safety, you kind of start to see maybe it's a counterpunch to Dontavian Wicks, Romeo Doubs, and Christian Watson over there in Green Bay. And of course, what they built with Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jamison Williams. That's the one way you're going to have to compete in that division, is keeping those elite receivers under wraps. And maybe the Vikings now have a couple of those pieces to at least be competitive at that part of that level of the defense.
And also what they like to do best, which is blitz, 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 blitz. They brought in some guys. They brought in Andrew Van Ginkel. They brought in Blake Cashman, some guys who came in, played for Flores and other stops. They're real happy right now with another edge rusher. I'm looking up his name frantically, an undrafted rookie that they brought in. And I believe, I'm not going to say the name. It might be Bo Richter is the guy who's coming in and had a phenomenal camp so far. You hope right now that it's competitive, and you hope that they have these pieces in place where they can be an exciting team. And then we've seen Sam Darnold have little streaks where he's an effective quarterback for a couple games, and then it gets weird afterwards. enough there so that that players can develop, that there's, some hopefulness, and then they can come in with something in 2025.
Yeah, I just wonder what the plan is there in Minnesota. I mean, obviously they were hoping that JJ McCarthy could be a first round talent, injury or not. I don't know that I was a believer in him having even the kind of upside to maximize all those weapons around him. They
Right.
built this dominant defense.
Yeah.
And they have Justin Jefferson, they have Jordan Addison, but there just seems to be a component missing there. It just seems to me that there's something about the DNA of that team that's missing. And it also seems like when you sign someone like Stephon Gilmore, that you're simultaneously trying to straddle the line after drafting a quarterback in round one between trying to compete now
Yeah.
and rebuild for the future.
Right.
But the landscape is littered with tombstones of teams that tried that but accomplished neither.
It's a very odd choice, Gilmore, especially coming in at this point. It seems like something that they had in the works like 3 weeks ago, a month ago. Now, again, like you said, I didn't look at JJ McCarthy and saying, well, here is the rookie who could lead a team to the playoffs, in a division with, the Lions and the Packers. So even there, it's odd. But I'm guessing that they want to do is bulwark this team and not backslide too much. Vikings are a team that have been working their way out of sort of a salary cap purgatory situation for a couple of years. They're still doing it. There's still money on the books that they're trying to clear out. It's an odd choice, but I'm looking at a veteran coaching staff that probably doesn't want to go and wind up having a 4-win, 5-win, 6-win season now, and then say our jobs are in jeopardy and we never get to do the things we wanted to do with JJ McCarthy.
For sure. There's another situation, another franchise that I think didn't trust their initial instinct following the 2022 NFL season, and that's the New York Giants. I mean, you look at Daniel Jones's track record as a starting quarterback in this league, coming off the injury, the torn ACL, his first action back. Saturday's game in Houston against the Texans felt like a microcosm of the Daniel Jones experience. And the play that encapsulated it for me and makes me wonder if Joe Shane, the general manager, and Brian Dable, the head coach, aren't already on the clock for John Mara, was the play where he was being corralled in the end zone, being yanked around, and he threw a lame duck pass that was intercepted by Petrie and returned 6 yards for a pick six. You wrote it in the Too Deep Zone. I think it was in size 1257 font, bold italics.
Yeah.
Franchise quarterbacks don't make that throw from the end zone. And it echoed with me. And I have a hard time shaking the image of John Mara on the HBO, the Max series Hard Knocks offseason. And he looks at Joe Shane and says, I'll lose sleep at night if Saquon Barkley winds up in Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm.
And I just look at what they did, not exercising the fifth-year option after the mirage of a season, in my opinion, from Daniel Jones in 2022 to signing to that 4-year deal worth $160 million, including $82 million guaranteed. And they feel confident enough to not get a quarterback this year, pass on Penix, pass on McCarthy, pass on Nix, and they draft Malik Neighbors, hoping that they can give Daniel Jones a weapon and turn it around. And it just looks like it's a house of cards that's already starting to flail in the wind a little bit here, and it's not even September.
It's not even September, and you're already looking at Daniel Jones and saying that 2022 season was the absolute peak.
Yes.
That 9-7-1 or whatever they went, and he completed some short passes. That was it. You have a coaching staff that you hear rumbles about that is like ready to fall apart at the seams. And we saw the things on Hard Knocks. This is a season that everything about it looks like we're going to be on firing watch in October.
Yeah.
And you're right. I don't know what their instincts really were, because I was shocked to hear Mara sort of being the anti-Daniel Jones guy. I assumed he was the pro-Daniel Jones guy. And to hear Sheen was the one who somehow talked himself into this guy they didn't even draft. This regime didn't even draft. But it's tough because you don't see the way out of it. When you show me a bad team like the Panthers, I was like, well, maybe Bryce Young comes around. And if not, they've got a whole new coaching staff.
Probably going to have a top 3 pick.
Yeah, right. This is a team that will, and then you look at the Giants, well, they'll probably win 5 or 6 games because they've got the pass rush, and Neighbors will catch some bombs, and Daniel Jones will throw a bomb once in a while. You're going to be firing a 3rd-year coach. You're going to be firing a 3rd-year GM. You're going to be getting rid of. You already got rid of Wink Martindale. You're going to be getting rid of Kafka, who looks like a good assistant, and you have very few solutions on that roster moving forward, except 1 or 2 guys like Neighbors, Thomas, Brian Burns, who you paid a lot for in a trade.
For sure. And there's also the going concern that my final story that I filed for NJ.com during the early parts of the 2020 NFL season was how could it have possibly taken, how could it be taking a decade to build an offensive line?
Mm.
We're 5 years down the road and they have one all-pro tackle. They brought in a veteran. But other than that, 3 or 4 question marks along the offensive line in front of Daniel Jones. They
Right.
removed a game-changing weapon by allowing Saquon Barkley to walk. So even if you draft a rookie quarterback in 2025,
Right.
do you really have, unless you're going to break the bank and bring in the best offensive tackle and the best center available to buttress this rookie quarterback coming in? It just feels like this is a franchise walking in the wilderness, and that the fatal error was not moving on from Daniel Jones when you had the chance to.
That was it. They won't have a bank to break. Okay, so if they were to cut Jones after this year, they do save some cap space. But you look at how much money Burns is taking up, and Thomas is taking up, and Lawrence is taking up. They can't go out and buy an offensive line.
No.
They're going to have to start all this stuff from scratch. And you saw that offensive line as well. It's better than last year, but last year was an absolute dumpster fire. Last year was like Scotch tape going across in front of him. Now you've got some capable veterans, and you've got Thomas there. This is a top 25 offensive line, right? This is not going to make Devin Singletary into a 1,500-yard back. It's not going to do any of those things.
Also a bottom 7 offensive line if you want to take the glass half empty look.
Right. It's out of the bottom 5, which is
correct. And, we talk about the offensive line. We've talked a lot about the quarterbacks on the show so far. 2 really interesting developments on the pass rush department over the last couple of weeks. And this is the time of year where you might see a player trade, which we just did with the Patriots sending Matthew Judon to the Atlanta Falcons. And you're going to see a lot of holdouts still in progress. CeeDee Lamb in Dallas, whatever's going on with Brandon Ayuk in San Francisco. And the big one, of course, is Haason Reddick in New York, which we'll get to in a couple minutes here. But the Matthew Judon trade I thought was really interesting. And I loved your line the moment after it happened on Threads at Mike Tanier, by the way. Go ahead and follow him. You said that the Falcons really are all in on being the number 5 team in the NFC. And that resonated with me all weekend. So I started asking around a little bit, and we know what they have on offense. I love the weapons. I think that Kirk Cousins is going to be an interesting storyline to play out with Michael Penix waiting in the wings. But what does Matthew Judon bring to that defense? And I talked to a defensive line coach who told me that he's always liked him. He still has that it factor, and he has a lot to prove. And then I reached out to Hugh Douglas, obviously multiple-time All-Pro for the Eagles, did some radio in Atlanta for a while, familiar with the Falcons. And Hugh told me that, they brought him in specifically to help Grady Jarrett. Grady couldn't be the one pass rush presence. So you bring him in there. He still has upside. And as a player, he has something to prove coming off that biceps injury. So to me, it looks like a solid piece at a premium position for a team that feels like they're on the cusp. Wondering what you think of that move and what he's going to add to that defense.
First of all, I was fascinated. It's not a trade and sign. There's no contract extension.
Right.
My first question is, how desperate were you to get out of New England? You get
very.
Right. Very. You're just going to play for whatever down there. That's the question. And, I think Judon still has a lot left on the plate. I think when he's motivated, he's going to be a good leader down there. It's just going back to what I was joking about on the internet. It's like I look at bringing in Kirk Cousins for all that money and say, you just made yourself a 10-win team, and then you bring in Judon, and that's now you're really a 10-win team. Then you bring in Justin Simmons. You are really a 10-win team. You are scraping that ceiling, and I like these players, but you're not raising your roof. You're not raising your ceiling. You're just kind of like sort of validating it and keeping it there, because all the 32-year-old edge rushers and safeties doesn't put you over the hump of those teams like the 49ers.
You're the 10th of 10-win teams
Yes.
in the NFC, where there's a clear line of demarcation from the San Francisco 49ers, Detroit Lions, maybe Philadelphia Eagles, and Dallas Cowboys.
Right.
And then you're Atlanta. And
there
you're
you are.
the best team.
And you are there. We're number 5. We're number 5, and you can just lock it in.
Yeah, and one guy who's not locked in right now, and I don't know if and when he's going to be, is Haason Reddick. And I feel like that's a story that I've written 50 times in a month, right?
Right. You
What
have
is
to have
going
done it
on
a
with
dozen
Haason
times.
Reddick? How does it play out? What are people hearing? What are they thinking? So I figured today, okay, I'll tackle it in 4 downs. Check it out at Between the Hashmarks from the agent perspective.
Right.
Reached out to 3 or 4 agents who are familiar with the edge rush market. And one guy told me deadlines spur action, cut down days next week. One way or the other, this thing gets worked out in the next 7 days, whether he's there or not. He told me anything's possible, but who's trading for Haason Reddick? Who's trading a draft pick? Who's, paying him top 3 edge rusher money, which he's going to be looking for, and who has the resources to do that at this stage of the game?
Right.
And I know we've talked about the Broncos being a fit from my conversations with scouts in the league. I don't know how many teams there are that can check all those boxes right now for Haason Reddick.
Right. And I don't see the Broncos saying, "Oh yeah, well we are in our development cycle. Let's take this risk right now on August 28th." From an agent standpoint, I mean, there's two sides of this. One, it'd be like, we should have gotten that deal done 8 weeks ago, and the other is you're just costing yourself money right now. I'm curious what agents look like. What would they advise a guy to do at this point in the off season?
Right. And I think that that's the $1 million question is why go down this road with the Jets?
Right.
You got traded. You can make the argument that if he shows up, even if he wants a new contract, if he sits out of the voluntary offseason program, I don't even care if you show up at minicamp,
Right.
but you show up at training camp, the preseason, you ball out.
Right.
Maybe it's week 3 or week 4 of the season, and you have 3 sacks on the resume. Then you go in and you say, okay, F you, pay me. You know what I mean? Like I've been the good soldier on this deal.
Right.
Pay me. And I had an agent talk to me about it today who basically said the biggest question, the 2 questions. One, was he given bad information by his agent or the team at the time of the trade where he came away thinking, I'm going to get a new deal, and it never materialized? Or B, did he just never want to play for the Jets in the first place, doesn't want to play for the Jets at all? And now you have this trade request lingering out there that Joe Douglas has said, we're not going to move you. Right. At that point, I don't know, Mike, I don't know what you do at that point if they're not going to trade him and he doesn't want to be there. If that's the case.
I heard a rumor that there was a verbal deal in place that he reneged on. That's the kind of thing that could steer towards he never really was excited about that team anyway. That could also just be something that floats out there. There's a lot of Jets copium surrounding this, where my barber's cousin blah 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 said this. It's such a weird, intractable situation. You look at the Patriots; they have a dust up with Judon. Now Judon's already under contract with them; they know him. That's different. They have a dust up. They tell him settle down, come in. He settles down, comes in. Everything cools off. He's in Atlanta. He gets a new deal. For some reason, the Jets cannot execute these very basic maneuvers that other teams do to throw ice water on these situations. I do not understand why.
And it goes back to my biggest question since this happened. You think back to when the Eagles traded for A.J. Brown and the deal got announced, and within 2 minutes, A.J. Brown is a $75 million contract with the Philadelphia Eagles. So you make the trade, you negotiate the deal, you make the trade, everybody's happy.
Right.
I just don't know if you're the Jets and Joe Douglas, why you would go down this road if you didn't have a deal in place. Now, if they had that verbal, then that kind of changes the narrative, at least in my opinion, and it kind of relieves some of that blame from the Jets. But not having a deal throws into question why you would do this in the first place.
And I've never heard of suddenly there's a verbal. You know how these things are done nowadays. You do a DocuSign and you click it and you announce it. I can't remember a verbal renege on a sign and trade thing suddenly being a thing. I'm going back to like Elvis Doomerville, and they didn't fax the information in, like that kind of goofy stuff happening there. It's like a once in a generation conflict happening between a veteran player with a veteran agent and a veteran general manager. It sounds very unusual.
Mike, let's talk some Dolphins. I don't know about you, but I'm pretty fired up about our next guest.
Absolutely. He's already admired my Reggie White poster in the background here, and had a chance to play against the Eagles back in the day, so I'm excited.
Played against a lot of legends, faced a lot of the elite pass rushers in the history of the NFL, which was one of the great eras of pass rushers in the NFL. Let's welcome in former Miami Dolphins legend, Richmond Webb. He also hosts a podcast of his own. It's Finside the NFL with Reason and Mr. Ballgame. Richmond, how's it going, man?
Matt, Mike, how y'all doing today? Thanks for having me on the show. I'm sure it's going to be fun, so I've been looking forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're obviously close to the Miami Dolphins. You see them every day and you talk to people around the league, and what you hear is, track team, track team, track team, speed, 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 speed. What are you seeing and what have you heard about the Dolphins in training camp and through the first couple weeks of the preseason this year that gives you confidence that they're going to take a step or two forward in 2024?
Yeah, Matt, I was able to watch the first game. It's a little tough during preseason, but you're right. It's like a track meet. You got Tua, I mean, not Tua, but Waddle, Tyreek, Moser, A-Chan, and I think they had a young man, Wright, another running back. So it's just speed galore over there. But what I've seen is, we drafted Chop Robinson, uh, Chubb, and Jalen Phillips were hurt last year. So for him to be a young pass rusher, I'm really excited about what he's going to bring to the table. And Jalen Phillips looks like he's ahead of schedule. So he might be ready for the start of the season. So everything is coming together. I think everybody knows about the speed, but what kind of hurt us last year were the injuries the second half of the season. And I think that's what guys want to focus on is trying to minimize, injuries are part of the game, but if you can minimize and keep your core group healthy, that makes a huge difference. So I think that's what the guys are looking at. And they definitely last year at that Kansas City game left a bad taste in their mouth. And I definitely know they want to redeem that and get back to playing Dolphins football.
You mentioned Chop Robinson. I just wanted to follow up there real quick because he's a guy that I think people around the league might be, some are sleeping on a little bit because of the lack of production at Penn State, while others are in the camp of, holy smokes, this is one of the more explosive and athletic pass rushers that we've seen in quite some time. During your playing career, you played against some of the elite pass rushers in the history of the game. So you obviously have a keen eye for scouting that position. What have you seen from Chop Robinson, and what's kind of your, Richmond Webb puts on his coach's hat or his NFL scout hat? What's your take on him as a player and his upside?
Well, so far, the things I've heard coming out of camp is just his work ethic, and not just on the field, but um, trying to get knowledge from guys that's played the position, the film work, this and that. So, normally when you're a first round pick, sometimes you can kind of feel yourself. It's just naturally you're one of the best players. There's only 32 first round picks typically in the NFL draft each year. So if you're one of those guys, you're a pretty good player. So, but that hadn't been the way he's been carrying himself since he's been in South Florida. He was excited to get drafted by the Dolphins, and from what I'm hearing, whether it's pads or no pads, he's a high motor guy, high energy guy, and he continues to work, and he wants to be one of the best. So he's definitely got the makings. He's putting the work in, so it's going to come together for him.
But by the way, I love the fact that the Dolphins have so much speed and so many weapons that you add Odell Beckham and you forget about him. Now, granted, he hasn't been practicing much; he hasn't been out there a whole lot. But that's the nature of that team. You were able to watch them. We saw the starters a little bit this weekend, and it looked encouraging to me. What did you see out of the starters? Or most of the starters? Tyreek and them weren't out there this week.
Yeah, that's the thing. I wasn't able to see. I'm here in Houston, so I wasn't able to see. I saw the first game, which
Okay.
none of the starters really played. In this game, they played. I saw some highlights, but they looked like they picked up where they left off, where they were healthy. And like you said, I did forget to mention Odell, but Odell's been Odell for a long time, and he's that type of playmaker to be able to add another weapon like that to your receiving core. It just puts a lot of pressure on defenses because he's a guy you can put in the slot. He can play the 1-2. He plays multiple positions, so you just don't know how they're gonna line up the pieces of the puzzle, but you just know you got to try to solve it, and that can be a nightmare for a defensive coordinator when you got to try to defend all those guys. You can't really say, well, we're gonna double Tyreek, and then you still got to deal with Waddle and Odell Beckham. So it's a headache that I'm glad that we don't have and everybody else has. So it's a good thing for the Dolphins.
Let me ask you this though: when you do watch a preseason game, from your perspective, a lot of times washed out with just backups and, vanilla game plans? What are you looking for? What do you want to see from a team that you find encouraging?
Yeah, I think it's only 3 now, right? So kind of the way I think most teams approach preseason now is you really want to get your starter some work, and that's normally one game. If they do play 2, they might play a quarter in one, no more than a half in the next one. But really what you're looking for are those guys that's on the bubble, are guys that, you got to make a 50, is it still 53 or 58 man roster or whatever?
Yeah.
So you have more than those guys in, and you be like, okay, can this guy help us on special teams? Can this guy be a quality backup? You got so many of those positions and so many guys are fighting. And a lot of times as a backup or undrafted guy, you only got a limited amount of opportunities to make an impression on the team. So whether it's in practice or whether it's in the game or whatever, you want to try to make as huge an impact that you can. You don't want to go out there and make a bunch of mental errors and stuff like that, because that can get you sent home as quick as possible. So I think it's an evaluation process, not so much for your starters and the guys they're going to be there, but it's for the guys that, yeah, we really like this guy. We like 3 or 4 of them, but let's see which one out of the 3 performs the best, and we'll keep him. And sometimes guys get an opportunity to be on the practice squad, which is not a bad thing, because it gives you more time to develop, learn the system, and continue to work against, guys in practice. So it's more of an audition for the guys that there might not be just truly unsure about, to see who's going to fill those spots that they have on the team. And I think that's what they use preseason for these days.
I do got to ask, back in your day, how much preseason did you play? You were a starter for years. Were you? How much did they throw you out there over and over again in August?
I can't imagine.
They did. Oh man, when Coach Shula was there, he was huge, and most of the time we would play about a half. And we normally play 4, sometimes 5 preseason games, but the first game you might play for the offensive line, it was pretty much a half. So you're gonna play a half. Second game, you're gonna play a half. The third game, you're gonna play about maybe almost 3 quarters. In the fourth game, you might play a quarter or so, and they get you out of there to get you ready. But yeah, it's totally different now.
That's bizarre. Did you find it helpful at all?
It is helpful to try to get your time, and I don't think, if you asked me back then, I didn't think I needed to play, but that's why I was a player and he was the coach. But you know what? It was definitely beneficial. I think it was a lot tougher then, because we went through like 6 weeks of 2-a-days, and just the grind to making it that. And by the time camp was over, you were looking forward to the regular season. It was a grind.
Yeah, totally different world back then. And you talk about the grind of the preseason and weeks upon weeks of 2-a-days and training camp back in your day. There was this, I guess it was the convoluted thought process, was that if we beat these guys up enough in July when it's 147 degrees outside, that there'll be a physical football team come September and December and January. It'll all come together. Richmond, looking at the Dolphins of this era, right? All we heard about and all we've talked about so far in this conversation is all of the speed at the skill positions, right? But the criticism was, can they be physical enough in the big moments? And you raised that question against the Buffalo Bills with division on the line last year at home. You see it rear its head a little bit in, minus 57 degrees in Kansas City in the playoff loss. How do they get that physicality to match the speed? Is it possible with what they've built?
And that's a great question, Matt. And I think what a lot of people don't realize, and I'm going to say it, but not making excuses. If you kind of look back at last season, our 2 tackles, Teron Armstead and Austin Jackson, pretty much were healthy majority of the season. But the interior of our offensive line, it was almost like musical chairs. After probably made it midway through the season, and then it was like plug and play. And I take my hat off to Coach Barry. Did a tremendous job. I even seen the growth of Austin Jackson. I thought he was a Pro Bowl player last year. So I think the key is being able to keep the offensive line unit healthy, and that makes a big, because you could even see the impact it made when those guys wasn't healthy. We wasn't able or as effective running the football. And I think you're right, Matt. the second half of the season and going into the playoffs, you've got to be able to establish some type of running game consistently. And not that you got to just gash people all the time, but you got to keep them honest. The level of play raises in the playoffs, and everybody knows is either you win or you go home. And if you look back at last season, it was, I think those last 3 or 4 games, at one point the Dolphins were in position to possibly be a number 2 seed and slide all the way to 7 seed. So I still tell people until we do it, the road still goes through Buffalo. Josh Allen and those guys, that's a rivalry that's been going on even before I got to the Dolphins. And it's still that way today. But I think if we stay healthy, I like our chances against anyone. And just having to deal with those injuries, having to deal with some defensive injuries, losing, I think we lost maybe 3 outside rushers last year. Chubb, Phillips, and was it Van Ginkel?
Yep.
But anyway, that's a lot. It's almost like it takes away a huge part of the game that not only do you need to protect your quarterback, but you got to be able to put pressure on the opposing team quarterback and lose those guys at that type of caliber. It definitely made an impact, but not making excuses. That's why I say staying healthy is more important than anything. And I think we'll be able to execute better and execute down the road.
No, for sure. And Richmond, you brought up the Buffalo Bills, and it's a little bit of a different era for them this year. You look at Stephon Diggs, he's catching passes from CJ Stroud down in Houston, and there's a lot of talk and Super Bowl buzz around the Texans. You look at Gabe Davis, he's a Jacksonville Jaguar now. So their receiving core is in a bit of a state of flux. They drafted Keon Coleman, who's getting rave reviews out of Florida State, but it's a different Buffalo Bills offense. How do the Dolphins close that gap? What has to go their way in those 2 games against the Bills? They took care of business, last year in Buffalo. Buffalo had all those injuries on defense, but they handled their business up there. How do the Dolphins close that gap and get it done this year?
I think one thing is, you got to know your opponent. I think the thing is Josh Allen is he's a playmaker. He's received some criticism as well, but if you watch him when the game is on the line, he normally delivers. And you got to be able to contain a guy like that, because not only does he have a rocket for an arm, throwing the football, but he can hurt you with his legs and his running ability. So he's a dual threat quarterback, and he does it from time to time. He'll recognize if you're in man coverage and drop like he's going to pass, and then take off and run 20, 25 yards down the field. And that's typically on like a 3rd down when a defense is looking forward to getting off the football field, and then he extends the drive, and that takes a lot out of you. So I think we just we know who they are. It's no secret. We've played them enough, but now we've got to make our decision and say, okay, whatever it takes, we've got to get over the hump and beat these guys. And like you said, losing Diggs, Davis, those were guys that were clutch, made the big plays, this and that. They got the young receiver, but, don't let him develop into the next Diggs. At least make him work a little harder. And I think with the guys we got, we should have an edge as far as receiving and stuff like that. So take advantage and let's be a more balanced team. Yeah, you got the speed and this and that, but I think you got to be balanced. You got to be able to run the ball effectively and throw it effectively. And I think it just makes it harder for teams to beat you and defend you, because now not only you're moving the ball and scoring points, but you're taking, the time of possession and limiting the opportunities for the other offense, which is always a great thing.
I see you retweet that there was a Richmond Webb Hall of Fame banner at the Dolphins tailgate. You weren't there, but the banner was there. Is that correct?
That is correct. And you know what? Shout out to the Dolphin fan base, all the different fan clubs. Last year, Zach Thomas went into the Hall of Fame for the Dolphins, and they put together a campaign just to raise more awareness, for my career and what I did during the Dolphins. And, I'm forever thankful, indebted or whatever, because, playing offensive line, if you ask me, I think I definitely did enough. I think I'm worthy or deserving of that. But a lot of times offensive linemen just get lost in the shuffle because we don't have the stats like a wide receiver or a quarterback or, defensive back or a linebacker. So Yeah, they've made up some posters and really been tweeting and
Mhm.
putting it on all social medias. And so, yeah, I mean, I am appreciative, but when you don't have to be that voice, which I don't think the Hall of Fame likes when you kind of try to self-promote, but it's somebody else doing it
Right.
and doing it not in a disrespectful way, not attacking the voters and this and that. Just say, hey, pay attention. This guy really has something deserving. I think that's a good thing. But if they were out there just bashing all the
Right.
writers and stuff like that, that would be a good thing. But yeah, they're doing it. Dolphins are a first class organization, and I met a lot of the fans and a lot of them that are part of the different fan club communities from around the United States and Mexico and overseas and stuff, and just great people. So yeah, I appreciate what they're doing, and can't be more than grateful because they don't have to do that, but they did.
It is special they're doing. It's great having them in your corner, Zach Thomas in your corner. You were a nominee last year, and hopefully we can start working up the line a little bit. I will tell you, like you said, those fan engagement campaigns do tend to work, especially when, like you said, they're doing it the right way, not bashing voters or other players. Like, oh, he's better than
Yeah,
that guy, which is
yeah,
not
that's not
appropriate.
that's not good. Yeah,
So,
they don't like that. So you're
yeah,
right.
yeah, no, I'm glad that that's working out for you.
And obviously, there's a
I appreciate it.
groundswell of Richmond Webb to the Hall of Fame, conversation happening in Miami. And we saw the banner at the tailgate. But obviously, when it comes right down to it, when if you become a finalist for the Hall of Fame, somebody needs to stand up in that room and pound the table and make the case that Richmond Webb belongs in Canton. If you were giving your own speech, if you were giving your own sales pitch to Hall of Fame voters, Mike Tanier and Matt Lombardo, we don't have votes, by the way, so don't come after us. But if we did, what would you want those voters to know? What would you say to them as your sales pitch to get into the Hall?
I think that the only thing I would say, and I wouldn't just beat them with a long speech, but like you see the accolades, this and that. The only thing that I would try to change the narrative, and I understand, but I don't understand. And a lot of people will say that, yeah, he was a great pass blocker. He couldn't run the ball, this and that. But when me and Keith got drafted, I came from Texas A&M. We kind of ran the option. They ran the option. It wasn't that we couldn't run the football. We were brought there to protect Dan Marino.
Yeah.
Dan Marino had been throwing the football even before we got there. So to say that we couldn't run the ball, that narrative needs to be changed, or I would ask that it be changed or redefined. We just did what they asked us to do, is come in and protect his blind side, and that's what we were required to do, and that's what we did. So it wasn't that we couldn't do it, it's just we don't call the plays. Whatever the play is called, we go out and execute it, and that's the only thing. But other than that, that's the only thing. And I just ask that you would reconsider or really think about that was kind of out of our control. But it's not necessarily that we were incapable of running the football, because that's not true.
Awesome.
Yeah, and Mike, I have one more, but anything else for you for Richmond?
Okay.
No, you can go on, Matt. Do your thing.
So I guess before we go, Richmond, when the book is written on the 2024 Miami Dolphins, if we were having this conversation in January or February, looking ahead from now, how do you see this season playing out for the Dolphins? What's their ceiling?
The ceiling for me is the playoffs. I don't know if they make it all the way to the Super Bowl. I'll be the happiest man if they do. I think they have the team. I think they have the coach to do it. It's just to say that now it's too many variables that everything has to fall in place and go right. And one of them is just injuries. But I think playoffs, and I think at least 1 or 2 wins in the playoffs. I think that's realistic, and I think it's definitely achievable. The only thing will stop that is, having a huge amount of injuries or something at key positions that kind of limit that. But long as Tua is leading the way, you got Tyreek. You spread the ball around. The way the defense is set up, if everybody's healthy, this and that, I think we're one of the best teams in football. So we definitely should be playing football in January and hopefully February.
It'll be an exciting year in South Florida.
Yeah. And Stephen Ross did say the team's a Super Bowl contender. So
I'm not arguing with Mr. Ross. If he said it, that's what I'm going with.
He's Richmond Webb. You can check him out on the Inside the NFL podcast. You can follow him on X at Richmond Webb. And hopefully this time next year, having just put on a gold jacket as a Hall of Famer, for my money, he gets into Canton. Richmond, appreciate the time, and we'll look forward to talking to you further up the road, my friend.
Hey, Mike, thanks. Man, I had a great time. It went faster than what I thought, but definitely we can do it again. And I appreciate you guys having me on the show.
Mike, that was a lot of fun talking ball with an all-pro like Richmond Webb, who, has a legitimate Hall of Fame case and is around the Dolphins to get a perspective on this year's team and what they need to get across the finish line.
yeah, and you know what? I know for a fact he's got supporters on the Hall of Fame committee. The trick is you got to get to the committee. You got to get from nominee, which is where he's been for, I guess, a year or two, to semifinalist, quarterfinalist, eighth finalist. I forget, there's a couple of steps to get in there, but he's right. You don't have the statistics. Maybe you have these strange narratives around you. You look at the body of work and you look at the fact that he protected Dan Marino's blind side for many, many years and got all-pro notice for it. He's somebody with a really strong case.
And you think about that era, all of the elite pass rushers, the Bruce Smiths, the Reggie Whites, the Lawrence Taylors, the Carl Banks, all of these, great pass rushers that played in that era. And he was involved in games against a lot of them, whether they lined up on his side or not. You had teams like the Eagles in that day that had, Seth Jordan and Clyde Simmons and Jerome Brown on the same line as Reggie White, who's there above your shoulder, with those of you watching on YouTube. It's not like he played in a division or in a league that lacked elite star power, but he played in front of one of the premier quarterbacks in the history of the sport and a first ballot Hall of Famer in Dan Marino.
And a guy who couldn't move, and it was all about the protection in an offense that threw the ball 60 times, and not as much short passing then as you have now. So you were out there protecting that blind side. It was funny though. Before we went on the air, he saw Reggie up there, and he's like, "Oh, that's Reggie," and I was like, "Yeah." He's probably got a couple of Dan Marino sacks listed up there, and Richmond was clear. He was on the other side of the line, but he was able to name the rest of the Eagles line from the very early 90s, late 80s, right off the top of his head. That kind of thing's going to stick in your brain for a long time when you actually have to face those guys.
For sure. And, before we get out of here, the Dolphins are one of those really interesting teams. I mean, we've talked about all the speed they have and the skill positions. We've talked about Tua in the past and what he can be as a quarterback. But I put the question to Richmond Webb, and before I get out of here, I'll throw it to you. How do they get more physical? And is it possible when you have that many speed guys to be able to beat man press coverage or to win in the trenches and do what you need to do to beat the teams like the Buffalo Bills and maybe the New York Jets and certainly the Kansas City Chiefs and the elite teams in the AFC?
And I don't have an answer to that. It looks like there has not been much changeover of personnel. Okay, so obviously they bring in Chop. They have a new left tackle behind Armstead. I don't think this young man's going to play this year. It's not just being physical, but it's also playing well in December and January. And I always worry about talking about the physicality of NFL teams, unless I see some team really getting their block knocked off. And maybe you saw a little bit of that with the Dolphins now and then. But I also worry about this team that's built for speed and built for this very intricate attack. And how are they going to play on the road in January, on the road in December? That's been a bet nor for them. And sometimes that and physicality comes down to simplify, simplify, simplify. Can this team downshift into 4-on-the-floor football? They've been reluctant to do that in the past. I think that's something that they have to take away from this season, saying, I see they've got Jets games. They don't have the Bills in December. They have the Bills in November in Buffalo. But they've got Jets games and Patriots games at the end of the season. It's like you have to be a simple running team. You can't have 5 guys going in motion and thinking that's going to work in those environments because it's going to be slippery. The road crowds are going to be against you, and you have to have a different club in your bag for that.
He's Mike Tanier. Make sure you follow him on Threads at Mike Tanier, and be sure to subscribe to Mike Tanier's Too Deep Zone. I'm telling you, it is mandatory reading for any true NFL fan. It's analysis written in a way you're not going to get anywhere else, and with tidbits and nuggets of information that a lot of people just don't see. That's why he's on the pod. That's why the Too Deep Zone has been so successful. So make sure you subscribe there and subscribe to Between the Hashmarks. So you can follow me on Twitter and Threads at Matt Lombardo NFL. Thanks, of course, to Richmond Webb for taking the time. Enjoyed the podcast. We'll talk to you next week right here on Between the Hashmarks.